We'll start by creating a new project. We're going to leave the default settings here. We are again going to create the project from template and use the command line app template. And here we're going to give the project a meaningful name. I'm going to call this loop example. Now, consider the case where we want an application that is able to count for us. And we want, of course, the program to print out what it has counted so far. Now, what we could do without using loops is something along the lines of system.out.println, because we want to print on a new line for each time we count. And inside here we can write, we have counted to 1. If we wanted to count to 5, what we can do is we can copy this statement here so that we have it written 5 times and then change the numbers accordingly. And then if we execute the program, we'll see that we have a program that seemingly counts to 5. You could argue that it doesn't count anything because it's just text that it's written out, but at least from a user perspective, that is what seems to go on here. There are some challenges with the solution that we've chosen here. For one, it takes a trivial task and uses 5 lines of code for it. Another problem is that it uses 5 identical statements to produce functionality which is more or less similar. It's a problem that we're using 5 lines because if this is the way that we are writing code and say that we want to count, for instance, to 100, thereby using 100 lines, is that it makes our programs harder to read. With respect to the replication here, we have an issue because if we wanted to change something, say that we wanted to change the text that is being printed out, the count is 1, for instance. Well, then we needed to do that 4 more times in this case, and 99 more times if we wanted to count to 100. This might seem trivial again for a program of this size, but imagine that you have a larger program where you have some functionality that you're using 100 times. Now, if you wanted to change that functionality, you need to remember to change it all the 100 places that you're using it. That might not even be consecutive places, it could be scattered throughout your code. And if you forgot to change it just once, well, then you had a program that wasn't functioning according to what you wished from the program. And ultimately that could lead to a program failure. And of course we want to avoid that. So how do we avoid that? Well, if we want to replicate the output down here, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change this one up here back. And then we're going to introduce a while loop. Before I introduce a while loop, what I'm going to do is I'll declare an integer variable. I'll call it I, and I'll put the value to 0. Then we can start our while statement. And the reason that I declared an integer above is that this is what we are going to use in our condition inside the parentheses here in our while statement. I'm going to write in here I less than, and then the number of times I'd like this loop to run. Now, this might not seem intuitive to people who are not experienced programmers, because why would I write less than 5 here? Well, that is because the count starts from 0. So that means that once we arrive here, the value of I is 0, and then once I has reached 4 and we pass through here, actually we have made 5 pass-throughs, which means that the loop has executed 5 times. Now you could ask, why don't you just start at 1 and then put an equals operator in here instead of a less than operator? And that's because when we're looping, we traditionally start from 0. That becomes very relevant when we are going to use loops to iterate through arrays, for instance. So for now, we have to accept the fact that we start at 0 and we use the less than the number of times that we want our loop to run. Then we're going to fill in some text down here, and we want to replicate the behavior from before. Of course, I can't not just copy this line of code here, because if I did that, what we would end up with is a line of text that says we have counted to 1 5 times. Now that was not how the original program behaved. In order to fix this, I'm going to remove the number 1 from here. I'm going to add a plus operator here, and then I'm going to write I. We also need to remember that when we're using a while loop, we are responsible for making sure that we don't end up in an infinite loop where this condition will always evaluate to true. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is each time the loop is running, we're going to count up the value of I1 with the increment operator. Now we're actually set to go, so I'm going to delete this up here, and we're going to test our program. And we see that the output produced is completely similar to what we have before. This structure here provides us with a bit more flexibility than we had previously. For one, I can change this text here to count is in order to change it for all instances of this text. So if I run this code, we'll see that I've now changed the text in all cases, and I don't have to change that several places. Another thing that I'm able to do is I'm able to change this to say 100, which was the number that we mentioned before. Let's try and run this and see if we are able to count to 100. As you see, we are seamlessly able to change the behavior of our program by changing a little number here. If we wanted to replicate this behavior in our previous program, as I mentioned, we needed to have the same code 100 times. So here we see the advantages of using a loop and how we do it.